Welcome to that indie runner. This is like normally a running platform, but because of lockdown, I started practicing yoga and incorporating yoga onto this platform. Before that, I was swimming. So this year, I really tried to make it what multi. I don't want to say multicultural. We could say multi-sport. So just
Yeah,
not focusing on running, also focusing on the other activities that we can do to become stronger runners. And because of lockdown, I noticed that actually yoga works. So yeah, welcome to that indie runner. The gist of our conversation today is just to discuss women's issues, women in yoga, diversity in yoga. This is all for Women's Month. To kick our discussion off, could you please introduce yourself?
perfect. Yeah, I'm so excited to see the rest of your interviews. So I'm Anesu. I'm a yoga teacher and medical doctor, but now focusing on my little business called the Nest Space, which is an inclusive wellness center. We have yoga and meditation classes, alternative therapies, a vegan cafe, and a zero waste grocer, all based in Greenside. So I kind of believe like my purpose and my journey has been a part of that has been to shed the light on yoga being a practice for everybody and for every type of body, and to really get people to see that this is a practice that is for them and that isn't intimidating, that you don't have to be flexible for before you start or thin or whatever people's concepts may be around yoga. And just to bring it back to the practice back to what it originally was a practice to help connect with each other, to connect with this world that we're in, but also to connect with
Mm.
ourselves. Mm.
I want to ask about your medical doctor journey because I saw that you actually started practicing yoga in your second year, but we'll touch on yoga later. I want to discuss your medical doctor journey. Are you still practicing? When did you start? Where did it all start?
Yeah, so I mean, I knew that I wanted to do medicine quite early on in high school. My dad and my dad's side are all a family of doctors or nurses, so I was really close to it, and I knew that that was what I wanted to do. Something about helping people with their health really struck out for me. And so, yeah, very gung ho, took all the right subjects, got into medical school, blitzed through medical school, and all the way through, I had no doubts that it was what I wanted to do. And in med school, you still get clinical experience, so you're still working in the hospitals. The more you go into your studies, the more practical
Mm,
hours you have with patients. And I loved that. I loved getting to know patients, meeting people from all walks of life, being able to help them. But then when I graduated and I actually became a doctor, I realized that, so few people had mentioned what the lifestyle of being a doctor was like. And I had always wanted to work in the public sector. The private sector had never really appealed to me. I generally just felt like if I wanted to do medicine, I wanted to do it where I could reach the most amount of people and the people who
mm,
needed it most. And so I got that when I was practicing, but what I didn't realize I was going to feel was a sense of helplessness, because health is made up of so many things, and
mm,
physical health, the stuff that the Western medicine tends to deal with, is only a small part of somebody's well-being. And so what I was experiencing is I would meet all of these patients, have a really good experience with them. In most cases, find out what was wrong with them, be able to help them and things like that. And then they would go home and I'd give them a tablet and tell them that this tablet was something they were meant to take for the rest of their lives, while still telling
mm.
them that they were healed or that I'd helped them. And then I'd have patients who would come back every 3 months to the doctor, and that's become a normal thing for people with chronic illness. They kind of
Yes.
believe that once you've got a chronic illness, that's it, you've got it for the rest of your life. to get to know kind of Eastern philosophy and the Eastern view on health, which is more focused on prevention. It's more focused on understanding the root cause of physical disease, which is usually an emotional trauma or emotional stress. And it had a lot more of a holistic view on health as well.
So now, are you still practicing as a doctor?
No. So what I did was, the more I began to feel helpless in my career, the less fulfilled I started feeling. And then it got to a point where I started to wonder if that was something that I wanted to feel for the rest of my life. Because I soon realized that if I wanted to work in the government sector as a doctor, my life was going to look pretty much the same as what it was looking like. And when I started to realize that I wasn't fulfilled, then it became a bit harder to make the sacrifices of like your sleep when you're on call, not having public holidays, not really having enough time with your family. So I decided to take a year's break, which we're allowed to do, to explore corporate or just to see what else was out there. And I've never gone back. Right now, I think I focus all of my attention on the nest space and the little business that we're brewing. And I haven't completely closed off the door to medicine. Who knows? I might go back to it at some point, but I'm really enjoying understanding health from a completely different perspective. And almost, you spend 6 years studying medicine and viewing the body in a certain way. And so it's going to take another 6 years or even longer to really be able to see the body in terms of how I view health now from a more holistic standpoint. So I'm really enjoying that.
And if you had continued on the journey of medicine, which specialty do you think you would have specialized in?
Well, definitely surgery. I love using my hands, and the intricacies of surgery I really like. And I was keen, the brain and the mind have always interested me. So neurosurgery.
Your story is very reminiscent of a book that I read by another doctor, and she left the system because she felt like, because of the resources, the lack of resources rather, she felt like her hands were kind of tied and she didn't want to be in that space anymore. And I feel like it's a big problem because now you have, let's say you've got 500 doctors graduating per year. And 3 years later, now you've got, I don't know, like 300 people left in the system, and now you have a pandemic like this, and that 300 is also affected to the point where they feel like they can't do it. My mother is a nurse and she works at a public hospital. And even with the COVID cases, if somebody tests positive, they'll maybe close the clinic for that afternoon or the next day, and then they back, 2 days after because they can't close. And also, if there are staff members that test positive, they have to work on skeleton staff. And that I think that puts a strain on people who work in the system. So what do you think could be done to actually improve the working conditions of the public health system?
It's a big problem. I think, especially with public services, teachers, whatever it may be, these people who essentially are providing essential services to our population, we really need to pay attention to the working environments that these people are in because, I think we're at a point where a lot of people are waking up to their worth and the quality of life that they're living now. People are a lot more aware of it. And while I agree that there's certain jobs where you do need to sacrifice, it's about finding that balance between feeling like you're sacrificing a part of yourself, but also feeling like there's an exchange, I always like to say with every interaction, there should be an exchange. So if I'm sacrificing my free time, my time with family, at the very least, I should be getting fulfillment, from my job, at the very least. And if that's no longer there because you feel helpless because there aren't enough resources for you to actually help your patients, then it's very hard for people to have motivation to sacrifice what they're sacrificing.
So when I was on your website, I read that you started practicing yoga in second year. And now that has grown to a point where you're a yoga teacher and you've got your own business.
My mom used to do yoga when I was growing up in Zimbabwe. She used to go to almost like this old cricket club, and they had this little thatched kind of place amongst the stands, and that used to be a little yoga studio where there were like just 4 or 5 people, generally older ladies, that would practice. And a few times my mom took me with her. And I was obviously the only child in the class. I think I must have been like 6 or 7 or so. But it was so special. It was so special. I can't really remember what poses we were doing or even what style of yoga we were doing. But I remember feeling at the end of all of those classes, I remember lying in Shavasana and just feeling calm and happy, you know? And I think that left an imprint. I think a lot of the things that we do in our childhood leave a subconscious imprint on ourselves. And so I kind of lost touch with yoga. You know, you go to junior school, you're playing sport. I loved running. That was a huge joy of mine. And competitive sport kind of took the limelight for me for a while during school. I'm quite a competitive person. And then I got to medical school, and medical school is it's quite a highly strung environment. You know, you get told that you're with, you know, the fellow cream of the crop, and you know, there's this kind of I wouldn't say very useful, a little bit of a destructive mentality of people trying to compete, and even within medical school. And so competitive sport kind of lost its edge for me because I felt like it wasn't really a release from my studies. And so that's when I started going back to yoga, and it was kind of a yoga studio based in Cape Town. I started it in winter, so I went to a hot yoga studio and absolutely loved the hot yoga. And then the more I learned about yoga, the more I realized that, you know, hot yoga wasn't really for me. And that's kind of where everything began, of searching for the style of yoga I liked, searching for a studio where I felt welcomed in. And I think those experiences were the ones that made me realize that if I did end up making yoga a bigger part of my life, that creating a space, a studio space, was going to be where I wanted to fit in that scene.
You just mentioned that you were searching for a yoga space where you were welcome. What type of experiences did you face where you felt like, you know, I'm not welcome in the studio?
Well, I was in Cape Town, and you know, Cape Town already, the city itself is so divided. All you need is to drive in a car through the southern suburbs, and you're very aware of the racial divide there. And my yoga studio was in Woodstock. So I started off at a yoga studio in Claremont, which was a bit suburban. So obviously I was always the only person of color in those classes. I then moved to a yoga studio in Woodstock, which was a bit smaller and which was the same. I was always the only Black student in the class. That it was strange that I didn't realize to. A lot of it was not really the style of music that I felt, that I felt connected to. A thing that I found to be interesting in those spaces was us and watching somebody teach you yoga whose body is completely different to you. They don't really share the same life experience as you. Yoga is all about healing. So especially if as a person of color, if what you're trying to heal are wounds that have been caused by racial divide or white supremacy or ancestral trauma because of racial divide, and you're not really able to be facilitated through that, I at least started to feel like something was missing. And I would ask my friends to come and do yoga with me and to come and join me for class over the weekend. And almost all the time I was met with this thing of like, yoga, that why I knew exactly what they were feeling, and what they were feeling was true. And so that sense of otherness was something that really stuck out to me during my practice, because it seemed almost hypocritical that the one space which is sharing this beautiful practice, which originated from brown people, is completely homogenous, and doesn't really touch on issues of race and brown bodies at all.
So these issues that you mentioned, as reminisce with me, I remember a podcast, it's called Yoga is Dead, and they were speaking about these issues that you're talking about. I think the episode is actually called White Women Killed Yoga. And in this
Mm.
podcast, these two women discuss all of these issues that you discussed, the music in the class, the body shape that you need to have a certain body type to practice yoga. I share the same experiences with you, where sometimes in the yoga class, I am the only person of color. Sometimes I'm the only guy in the class, you know? And if you don't have the will to say, I'm going to be here because I want to be here, you won't go back to the class again. And I think studios like yours are few and far between, and I actually commend you for having your own space where you wanted to change the narrative. I also had somebody on my WhatsApp say yoga is on a level of white people fitness that they don't ascend to. And
Mm.
for me, that was, I kind of felt like, if I can do it, I am not a skinny person and I can't do all the poses, then somebody else can also do it.
When I started up the space, I wanted it to be everything that I was missing. And I think just to touch on what you've mentioned before, as brown people, like we're going to be having to do the work of pioneering and pushing ourselves into spaces where we've never been for a while.
Yeah.
And I think people need to accept that unfortunately that is the journey of a brown body, that you will feel like you're pushed into spaces that you don't belong, because sometimes they've been purposely made to make you feel that way. um, and so for me, when I was facing this dilemma of going to yoga studios where I felt other, the dilemma for me was trying to decide whether my work was to fit myself into white spaces and change them from within, or whether my work was to start something completely different. And I found, with the whole thing around this whole movement around Black Lives Matter and everything that's changing nowadays, I find for me that I get the most solace of feeling like I'm doing something or contributing to the world when I feel like I'm starting something myself. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's whether because, as brown people, we've been ownership, the concept of ownership has been completely stripped away from us. Um, but that's what I decided. And so the Nest space is inclusive from top to bottom. And that's down to the staff and the teachers that we employ. Currently, our team is full of a diverse group of women of color. All of our teachers are women of color from different cultural backgrounds. They all have different body types and body shapes. When we advertise our services, we're very sure to make sure that the people who are in our marketing material represent the very people who have felt other in these practices. Like you were saying, so many people associate yoga with these poses that skinny white women are doing on the beach, and they see a body doing that looks completely different to theirs, and so they believe that because their bodies are a bit bigger or a bit more curvy or just different in shape, that they won't be able to get into those poses. And so when we advertise, we make sure to show brown bodies doing beautiful yoga poses to completely erase this misconception. So that's our yoga studio. We are also moving more towards trying to understand what African spirituality can bring to the table in terms of yoga, and trying to trace the lost roots of how we as Africans would use movement to connect to our spirituality, movement, sound, dance, which is essentially what yoga is,
Mm.
So that's one of the things we're moving towards. So we now have included an Egyptian Kemetic class to our schedule, which we find is very important, just to represent the fact that yoga also stems from Africa. It stems from this continent.
Mm.
And then when it comes to our cafe and our store, we wanted to show people that this new sustainable holistic lifestyle that has become on trend is not just for Europeans, not just for people in the States, not just for the wealthy in our country, but is for everybody. And so our zero waste grocer is supplied predominantly by small businesses owned by people of color. I think 95% of our suppliers are woman-owned small businesses. And then our vegan cafe makes delicious vegan food from a more African soul food kind of perspective. So we do things like when we have our buffet, we do 7 colors the vegan way, just to show people that things like veganism and things like zero waste have been a part of our life for generations. You know, our ancestors were not eating meat every day. You know, they would most of their diet was vegan, and then they would have meat in ceremony. Living is the way of the African, you know, whether it's reusing your skin, whether it's using plastic bags to make soccer balls, whatever the case may be, you know, this is these ideas and these ways of viewing the world, of being in touch with nature, of wasting as little as you can, of having a diet that fulfills your body, are concepts that are natural to us as Africans. And so that's what we try to push. We don't push yoga, veganism and zero waste from the perspective of, yeah, these are concepts from the West, and as Africans, it's now our time to adapt them. No, it's more about us taking ownership of the space, of the practices, and trying to reconnect to our roots and our ways of living before, you know, that we've that have been erased through history.
There's 2 questions that stem as you are discussing about your space. The first one is access. So when you mentioned that your studio is in Greenside, the first question that hit my head was, do you have any plans to expand your yoga classes services into areas that are predominantly settled by people of color? And what did I want to ask again? I'll remember. So start with that one.
Yes, 100%. I think one of the things we've had to become comfortable with is the discomfort of knowing that while we've started and we're on the path of inclusivity, there's such a deep-rooted separation between different groups of people and this practice that we haven't managed to get everything right. I mean, I just mentioned to you that our space is all about welcoming people of all bodies, but one of the things about our Greenside space that we currently can't change is that we have stairs leading up to the studio. So if there's somebody who is in a wheelchair or somebody who's not able to access from a physical standpoint, then we're not accessible to them. You know what I mean? And the same is true, as you said, in terms of our geographical location. I mean, Greenside is pretty central. We've got the students, we've got, you know, people from town and things like that. But still, you're still kind of catering to a certain class level. You're still catering to people who have transport to be able to get there. And so, yes, definitely the issues of accessibility are huge for us. And we haven't got all of the answers yet. Online has been an interesting one because it's helped us connect to people who aren't in our city and who aren't able to travel to come to meet us. But again, it takes a certain amount of privilege for you to have the data or the Wi-Fi required to be able to stream a yoga class, right? And so for us, it's been a journey of starting somewhere and constantly questioning ourselves, constantly putting ourselves in the position of people who live differently to us, and to try to find ways to bring this practice to them. One of the things that we are thinking of is, you know, we've got our teacher training coming up, and part of a teacher training is that you need to do a mandatory number of teaching hours before you can teach. And so one of our thinkings or one of our ideas is to link our yoga teacher trainees up with people or organizations who work in the townships or even in rural communities who are generally a bit isolated, and to have our yoga teachers trained to teach in these environments, hopefully spark an interest of yoga in those communities. And thereafter, if there's anybody from those communities who's keen to do a yoga teacher training, then making that accessible through a scholarship, through sponsorship, so that you actually get people from those communities being trained to take the practice out. I think another big thing that a lot of people miss when it comes to making things accessible is they kind of forget the aspect of putting the practice in the hands of the people who are having difficulty accessing them, and giving them the agency for them to be able to shape what that looks like in that context. I think it would be problematic if we had initiatives where we would just send all of our yoga teachers out once a week to the township, have them teach and then leave, because how is that sustainable? You know, those communities are then still dependent on you in order for them, you know, for them to have access. So it's more about how do we find people who are already existing in that context, train them up to be able to teach and empower their own communities, and also to change the yoga practice slightly, you know, according to their needs and their requirements and what the people in their communities are going through.
And maybe in that case, we can flow to Amapiano music, you know, or Kwaito.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, I had this amazing experience where I was asked to head out to Soweto and teach yoga to this incredible group of Pansula dancers. And so I'd go every weekend and we'd do yoga together. And most of the time, these guys were teaching me, man. I mean, the things that they could do with their bodies, the way that they incorporated into dance. And it ended up being more of, like I said, an exchange, as opposed to me going out there and believing that I had all the answers and things. And so it's not about going out there and preaching to people about the yoga practice and how you have to have a yoga mat when you practice. You have to listen to this music. You have to know all the Sanskrit names, you know, to these poses. It's more about, you know, let me meet you where you are. What things interest you? What challenges are you going through? How do you use your body to relieve stress? And then seeing the ways that you can kind of work together to bring yoga into everyday life in a way that makes sense for you. And then you transferring the knowledge that you have to me, so that when I teach, I can teach from a perspective of what I've learned from you as well.
That's very important, because then now you're building a network of yoga teachers in a place where there wasn't a yoga presence anyways.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's actually a smart way to like expand and grow the yoga mindset within the community. You mentioned that you have you've got a vegan grocer, a vegan shop. Do you
Yeah, a
follow
vegan
a
cafe.
vegan,
Yes, but
a
yes.
vegan cafe? Do you follow a vegan lifestyle?
My veganism is a journey. You know what I mean? I have days where I feel like this is what I'm gonna manage to be vegan for the rest of my life, and I'm never gonna take meat ever again. And then I have other days where I'm like, you know, that may change. Who knows? Maybe, you know, if I have a child one day, I don't know what I'm going to experience when I'm pregnant or when I'm older. So yes, right now I'm plant-based and I love it. It's done miracles for my skin. I feel like I have more energy. I feel more healthy. But I'm definitely not one of those vegans who tells meat eaters that, you know, they're the scum of the earth and can't understand why people eat meat and shun people because of it. That's definitely not the way that I approach it.
I often make a joke at work, because sometimes I'll eat a meal without meat, and my colleagues are like, "Where is the meat?" And I tell them that I'm going to convert to veganism, and I'm going to be one of those extreme vegans. We're going to look at you and say, "What about the poor baby cow? You're eating its mother, you know?" Um, yeah, but I've thought about going vegetarian, but the problem is the food that we have access to is it's hard to find something that's, you know, vegetarian. So let's take it from the context of a fast food place. It's hard to find a vegetarian meal that's tasty, you know. So what challenges do you face as a vegan in terms of like acquiring food?
So I started off my kind of vegan vegetarian journey, where I initially thought that being vegan or vegetarian was just about cutting meat out of what you were eating. And I soon realized that if you do that, then you're always going to feel like something's missing, man. you can't be making, you know, the same meal that you would usually make with a beautiful steak and then cut the steak out and expect to be satisfied with that same meal. You know what I mean?
You know,
You're always going to be
I know
like,
that.
"Yeah, eating aside here, what's going on?" So for me, it was about completely shifting that mentality and saying, no, my plant-based diet is about making dishes that are originally made to be plant-based, where from the get-go of that recipe, there was no meat in there, because then the flavors and the different ingredients that you use make it feel like a more wholesome meal. So that was the one thing for me. Fast food is always a tough one. Fast food is a tough one. People have been on this journey of like trying out vegan burgers from McDonald's and all of these places, and it doesn't hit the mark. Currently, my fast food is a Steers burger. The Steers burger is the best kind of vegan takeaway burger. So I kind of order a Prince burger and then get a vegan patty in there. That tastes pretty good. I found that Steers is kind of the best one. But it's tough. The fast food is actually the toughest one. I find that fast food, and before lockdown, obviously, going to restaurants with friends, where friends would pick the restaurants, recipe for disaster. Rather eat before and just order a starter, you know, because most restaurants aren't there yet. But what has become easier for me has been learning how to shop, so that cooking vegan meals at home becomes a lot easier. Understanding different ingredients more, like beans and legumes, and seeing them on their own, not just in terms of, okay, this is an ingredient that I can add to a curry with meat just to add a bit more body. No, rather, how do I use this ingredient to be the star of my dish? You know what I mean? But it's a tough one, and it's...
Sorry, please go on.
No, I was going to say it's a very tough one. Most of the people who come to our cafe are meat eaters who are kind of experimenting with, you know, plant-based and how it would work for them. And we just tell them that it's a journey. You know, I think if anyone is wanting to change their diet or their lifestyle in any way, you have to be doing it for you, number one, and you have to find a way to make it enjoyable for you. No one wants to be feeling like they're depriving themselves for the rest of their lives just because they don't want to eat meat. No, if anything, it should feel good. It should feel tasty. It should make you feel good, because that's what will motivate you to keep it up. So we've toyed around with the idea of maybe doing vegan cooking classes, so we can actually physically show people how to cook with these ingredients, and easy and quick meals that they can make at home. So that kind of stuff we're still working on. But yes, it's a journey. It's a tough one.
And in terms of cost, because I remember at work there was is it a Beyond Belief burger?
Beyond Burger. Yes.
Yes. So
expensive.
I was speaking with somebody who's also a vegan over these lives, and they mentioned to me that the processed vegan food is actually the expensive food, but once you go for the base ingredients, then it's actually a not so expensive lifestyle, because there is this concept that, you know, turning vegan is actually more expensive than being a meat eater.
Yeah, exactly. That's another big misconception, and you're totally right. You hit the nail on the head. Yes, if you are trying to look for meat substitutes like soy, that kind of thing, then it's definitely going to be a lot more expensive. But what I've really enjoyed with my journey is learning how to use the base ingredients to make these things myself. So rather than buying a cashew nut cheese alternative from Woolies, learning how to make it myself, you know. And when you do that and you work with the raw ingredients, then you start to see the magic of veggies and how they're almost like shapeshifters, and in the way that you can cook them in one way and it can taste one way, then you can mix it with another veggie, cook it in another way, and the texture changes completely and it tastes like something else. So yeah, definitely I try to stay away from the processed stuff and the substitutes, and work more on things like making my own hummus. I'm lucky I have a partner who loves being in the kitchen, both in terms of business life. I've got the best business partner, Vanessa. She's our cook at the Nest Phase. And then at home, like my partner Fez is a great cook. So this is like the best case scenario where I have people who love to cook around me. So they kind of take care of most of it. But it's about, yeah, getting to know the base ingredients and having fun with making your own stuff. Try out making your own almond milk. Try making your own oat milk, especially the oat milk is a big one because oats are so affordable. The process isn't too
Mm-hmm.
hard to make oat milk. And then you've got, really affordable vegan milk available for you. So it's about learning stuff like that and having fun making that stuff and knowing that, it might seem a bit intimidating, but there was someone out there at the beginning who decided to be vegan who had to make these things from scratch
Yeah.
before. And so it's totally doable.